Free Church of Sweden is in crisis and it needs your prayers today. The joint Free Church of Sweden have conducted a survey that ranges back 20 years, from the year 2000 to the year 2020. And in it, they were looking at church membership, church growth, church decline, how many churches have begun and how many churches have closed in that time period. And the results were shocking. And the conclusion of the report was that the Church of Sweden is in crisis. Thank you for coming to watch Mission Sweden. My name is Ben. I'm a church planter and I moved to Sweden with my family so that we might plant a church by the end of 2023 somewhere in the city of Gothenburg. And we do this blog because we want you to be a part of our journey and we want to take time to think through Sweden through the lens of the gospel. And if that's something that's on your heart, if you're interested in sharing Jesus with Swedes, if you're interested in mission in Sweden, then please do like, comment and subscribe to this channel where we'll be bringing out more content regularly and where you can follow our journey as we go along. Doing all that stuff will actually help us make contact with other like-minded people in Sweden and across the world. So anyway, with that all behind us, let's get on with the video. Well, today we're going to do something which is a bit depressing actually. We're going to be considering what the gospel need is in Sweden and why Sweden so desperately needs Jesus. The Swedish Free Churches did this survey between the year 2000 and 2020, and they were looking at church membership and church growth as a whole across Sweden in the free churches. And we're going to be looking not at the whole survey, because actually it's about 20 pages long. It's all in Swedish. There's lots of detailed information there. If you'd like to read that yourself, I'll put a link in the description below where you can download it. Or if you'd like to get some sort of short form summary, there's a couple of news articles that came out that are in Swedish, but you can translate them to English really easily if you have a decent web browser. So please do take a look at those if you're interested. But today I just want to kind of narrow it down to just two important statistics, two big headlines that I came away with as I read through that survey. The first headline is this: there are 25% less free churches in Sweden now than there were 20 years ago. In 2000, there were 2,925 parishes. By 2020, there were 2,201. That's 25% less free churches across the whole of Sweden. Now, and actually, when you're looking at the number of churches that actually closed down, it was way higher. The number of churches that actually closed down in that period were 1,127. That's 38.5% of all Swedish free churches closed in 20 years. Nearly 40%. That's nearly one church every week for 20 years. One church every week. Now that statistic was rescued back a little bit because over 400 churches were planted in that time as well. Meaning that only a measly 700 free churches closed their doors. 400 new churches planted, over 1,100 churches closed down. Sweden needs church plants, but it needs a lot more. Shocking headline number 2 is this: church membership in Sweden as a whole has dropped by 10% in 20 years. So in the year 2000, there were 240,000 church members. But in 2020, there were 220,000. That's a dropping of 20,000. That's 10%. And that means that Swedish free churches represent 2.2% of the population in Sweden. 2.2% of the population of Sweden are members of Swedish free churches. Now you may think that 2.2% is a good number. Okay, and actually that's not too bad. You might compare it to your own nation's national average, and please do go ahead and have a look at that. But you've got to understand that church membership in Sweden does not mean the same thing as it does, at least in the country that I grew up in the UK. They mean very, very different things. And this report only focuses on church membership. It only says one thing about church attendance, which I'll mention later. And now this is the difference, and I learned it the first time I visited Sweden. I came to Sweden and I visited Emily's, my wife, my then girlfriend's, my now wife's family, and I spoke to her father about our churches and how they were similar and how they were different. And one of the things we talked about was size, and he asked me how big our church was, and I said, we've got about 100 members in our church. And I was going to a small Baptist church in East London at the time, and he was really shocked, and he said, well, our church, we got 500 members. I'm surprised it's so small, your church. Oh, and I said, wow, 500 members. I know the church building was pretty small, and I was saying, how did you fit them all in? How many services do you have to get them in on a Sunday? And he said, oh, no. They don't all come to church on Sunday. We get about 50 people regularly on a Sunday. I was shocked. You mean 450 people are members of your church don't come to church ever? And that was it. And that, I think, is a summary of what churches in Sweden. It's not strange to hear of a high membership in a free church in Sweden and actually discover that they have an incredibly low church turnout. See, they have a very different way of thinking about membership. Membership isn't about the people that are committed to the mission and values of your church. Membership is more of a parish model. So anybody that lives in this community is a part of our church, and anybody who wants to be can be a member of it. You don't even need to come. That means the person who doesn't believe in God, who never ever talks to the pastor, never ever attends church, has the same voting rights as someone who is involved in the week by week ministry of the church, who's intricately a part of that church. That's how it works here in Sweden. So when you think 220,000 members of free churches, what does that number actually mean? But earlier on I mentioned that the report did mention one thing about church attendance, and this is what it says. It's right in the conclusion at the end, and they're quoted from another survey that the Church of Sweden did, on which part of their survey talked about church attendance as a whole on any given Sunday. And this is what it says. In 1990, on average, there were 173,000 Swedes that participated in Sunday's main service. Now there are only 65,000 persons. 65,000 people. Not just talking about free churches, but also throwing in the Church of Sweden. 65,000 people as a whole. Now let's just split it down the middle and pretend that half of those people go to free churches and half of those people go to the Church of Sweden. Which it probably isn't. It's probably a lot more people go to the Church of Sweden. That means 0.3% of people in Sweden attend free churches, and only 0.6% of Swedish people actually attend church on a Sunday. And then, okay, so let's just come back for a second. So let's say of those 65,000 people, I wonder how many of them are actually attending churches where the Bible is proclaimed faithfully, where the gospel is understood and is taught clearly. And I am scared to know what the answer to that is, because I promise you, from my experience in Sweden, from talking to church members of many churches and leaders of many different congregations, the answer will be shockingly low. What do we say in conclusion to this? Well, I think 3 words. Sweden needs Jesus. You know, the Lord looked out. In Matthew chapter 9, Jesus looks out at the crowds that are following him, and he says this to his disciples. in verse 37, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Will you pray that for Sweden? 10 million people that need to hear the gospel of Jesus that aren't represented by local churches. Would you please pray that the Lord would send labourers, that he would raise labourers up, that he would raise up theologians, pastors, teachers, preachers, missionaries who would love the gospel and who would commit to serving in this nation. When Jesus asked the disciples to pray this, in the very next verses in chapter 10, the very next thing he does is he calls some of those people that prayed this very prayer to be the 12 apostles. And I think every time we pray, Lord, send more labourers into the harvest field, we have to at least ask ourselves, is the Lord sending us? Is the Lord going to send me? Lord, do you want me to go? And I'm just going to ask you, if you're not living in Sweden, if you follow this blog regularly, would you please pray for Sweden and at least consider prayerfully that the Lord might be wanting to send you? And if you're a church leader anywhere else in the world, please make sure Sweden is on your prayer list regularly. If you've got a missions board, like your other big world maps, and you've got pins all over it, please stick a huge whopping great big pin, bang, in Sweden with a big arrow pointed to it. Say, pray for Sweden, it desperately needs missionaries. And pray for us, because we don't just want to plant one church in Gothenburg. We want to see churches planted all over this nation, and that's way beyond our ability. So please pray that the Lord might do something in our midst, around us, and that we might have, that Emily and I might have in some small way used in seeing churches flourishing once again in this land. That we might see not just churches planted, but churches revived for Jesus. Well, it wasn't a very uplifting video today, but I hope you found it interesting, and I hope it might fuel your prayer more fervently for this nation. So again, let me remind you, if you please like, comment and subscribe. If you've got any questions, please stick them in the comments. I'd love to engage with you in any way that I possibly can. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you, or you seeing me again in just over a week's time, where I hope my wife will be sharing her testimony. So please pray she prepares for that. Okay, thank you all, and see you next time. Hej då!